Well, I've chosen this topic ESP for several reasons. English for specific purposes is a term that is known to all of us. It's an age old term. Some might even consider that it is cliched, it's old fashioned, and why do we have to talk about it now? I am of the firm view that ESP approach to language teaching or language testing is as relevant is as any other modern approach as content integrated learning approach or the task-based approach or the flipped approach which Sajya Pradeep was talking about sometime just prior to me. I thought I would raise some of my apprehensions in the sense that when we do not deliver language classes to suit the needs of the learners, then there's a great danger that this profession is at a great stake. I have in mind the current move by the Anna University that the first two semesters of English in all the engineering colleges in the state would be taught by Cambridge English. And already there are several other examinations, the school levels and college levels and tests, which are extremely popular. But this move that they would teach the students directly, you all can guess the implications. What does this have to do with? What does this have to do with ESP? These courses that they are offering through mobile means or an online source or any other electronic platform is supposedly geared at meeting the needs of the learners. And there's an acceptance from administrators, educational as well as from industry, that these courses and these tests are more reliable than, though they don't say directly, when they start choosing this medium, then it means that there is a minor amount of distrust in what is happening in the universities. Therefore, I thought I would share my thoughts on what an ESP is. We all know that English for specific purposes has got this term ESP. It aims at preparing students or learners for using English in specific disciplines, vocations, or professions to accomplish some specific purposes. Tom Hutchinson and Alan Waters, big names in ESP, said that ESP is an approach to language teaching in which all decisions as to content and method are based on the learner's reason for learning. The four characteristics of ESP as put forward by Peter Stevens in 1988. I'll just begin with this kind of a theory for some time, maybe about 5-10 minutes, and then I'll come back to discussing what happened. ESP courses are designed to meet the specific needs of learners related in content to particular disciplines, occupations, and activities, centered on the language appropriate to those activities in syntax, lexis, discourse, semantics, etc. And finally, also says it is in contrast with general English. I would like to pose a question to this August gathering. Can we agree that our general English courses that has been offered at our schools or in our colleges, either engineering or arts and science, does not really do this? If it doesn't, then what aspects of ESP can we take into consideration while offering general English programs. As I started my lecture saying that everything seems to be moving in the direction of something that the learner would grasp, something the learner would understand, and his skills would improve in a shorter span of time, number one, and exactly the needs that he has. If we have, for example, a final year student of engineering or a student of engineering even at the first year level, one of the major concerns for choice of the branch or choice of engineering as a course to do is driven by the fact that these courses are employable, number one, a high salary, number two, there is a great potential for going abroad, which is also a great interest in the majority or all of the public. If that be the case, to what extent our general English courses offered in the engineering really help our learner, or is it directly aimed at preparing him either for his studies further or his job selection? Job selection would mean meeting some of the criteria that employers have in selecting the students. By and large, most of the interviews, as far as I know, believe in conducting an interview, a GD session, an aptitude test, and then they select them. My question today is, to what extent are we gearing to these needs of our students? Do our students even know why a company is conducting a GD? Most of them believe that they are testing their language skills, which is not really true. When it comes to your further studies, most of our students are aspiring to study abroad for right or wrong reasons. And most of the countries that they are going to would require them to take an IELTS as a test to be eligible to join those courses.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, sorry to interrupt. The slides are not changing, sir. What we see
Okay,
on screen
okay,
in
okay,
our.
okay, okay. All right, all right. I did not change the screen. I just went ahead on my own. All
Oh,
right.
all right.
I
All
will,
right.
I will, I will relate this to the screen. I was a bit afraid about putting in too much of a theory. Anyway, I'll go with the slides.
Thank you, sir.
See, there are different types of ESP. David Carver identified three types: ERL, EAOP, and EST. English as a restricted language. EAOP, English for academic and occupational purposes. EST, English with specific topics. English as a restricted language. This is a kind of a comment which is rather not very favorable to an ESP, which might be true of certain ESP, but not true of all ESPs. He has in mind courses, for example, maybe some of you, lots of English teachers across the country, are engaged in training air traffic control officers at the Airport Authority of India Limited. I do not know if there's anybody in the audience who is involved in this job. Whenever you go to the airport, you have this tower where the ATCOs are directing the planes to land, take off, go around on the tarmac, and their instructions are very important. And as they play a very crucial role in interacting with the pilot, they have a particular code of language which is universal. So any one pilot from any one country would be able to communicate to a ATCO using that language. So that was also considered as a type of ESP. If I have to take another example for a restricted language, Let's say, for example, a Japanese or a Korean who wants to travel to England or USA, and he does not have the basics of English language. He has a book in his hand, a guidebook, which will give him the language which he would need, which would be able to comfortably get on with people, get on with his life as a tourist for a short stay. These courses of this type do not have a long range value. They do not really teach the English grammar or English vocabulary in general. They are restricted to a very, very narrow domain, so that is called a restricted language. Then English for academic and occupational purposes, you all know almost all the courses that we have for any kind of an academics or for a job. Now, further on, when the ESP, understanding of ESP changed, Tom Hutchinson and Alan Waters pointed out, they broke the ESP down to further more meaningful branches. English for science and technology, English for business and economics, English for social studies. And each of these subject areas are further divided into English for academic purpose and English for occupational purpose. English for science and technology, for example, can be considered as English for science and technology for academic purposes, which will be meant for the students of engineering. And English for science and technology for occupational purposes would mean it's a course for English for technicians, lab assistants, and so on. So the basic fundamental beliefs and concepts underlying these courses are, while a general English course offers learners the opportunity to become fluent in the language, English for specific purposes provides content altered according to the needs of the learner and the requirements of their profession. So too much of a general English, as this statement would mean, does not completely focus on the needs of the learner. In other words, a lot of what is taught, a lot of the time that is spent on a general English course, perhaps is not a very productive time or energy spent, whereas ESP proposes that it would be directly aiming to satisfy the needs of the learner. Another belief is ESP approach enhances the relevance of what the students are learning and enables them to use English they know to learn even more English. This is a premises where ESP is looked at as a course offered to those who already have a certain amount of what is called as a general English. People who have general English will be able to acquire the vocabulary, sentence structures, other aspects of language necessary for communicating in a particular situation. For example, there could be a course on English for the air hostess, or the English for a person in marketing, or even an English for a school teacher, English for a college teacher in the class. I've seen such books too, where when the people have certain fundamental language ability with them, these courses aim at fine-tuning their skills to their own profession or their own study. In other words, it enables them to use their own English better in the situation in which they are operating. For example, let us take a hotel receptionist for that matter. If we take a hotel receptionist, he or she would be able to perfectly communicate quite well and meaningfully for the purposes of the job. Take him or her out of the reception zone and engage in a general conversation. It has been proved in quite a few researches that their language is not that proficient as it was when they were using it for their professional needs. So this year's approach believes that it does that. But that's also a necessity. One has to be good in using the language for his job or for the course that he's studying, but ESP aims at doing that. Another belief is the field of ELT, English for specific purposes, concerns the specific English language needs of target learners. It refers to teaching a specific genre of English for students with specific goals, which is oriented and focused on English language teaching and learning. Well, basically it means these are ESP courses aim at satisfying learners' needs. Though ESP has come of age, it was, I think, at the time of the Second World War and oil crisis time, 70 years ago, when ESP became an approach to language teaching. But I would like to point out how it is relevant even today. Let us not spend much time on how ESP believed in a skill-based approach, a register analysis approach, a discourse analysis approach, learning-centered approach, and communicate approaches in course of time. And finally, now, since people are talking a lot about task-based learning and CLIL, how are they related to ESP and approach to language teaching? Task-based learning, I think there are quite a few papers presented on this topic, is an approach to language learning where learners are given interactive tasks to complete. In order to do this, they need to communicate. Once the task is complete, then the teacher discusses the language used. For example, the learners might plan an itinerary for a guest who is coming to stay with their teacher. They research places to visit and timetables. They prepare a written schedule and a short guide. Once the task is completed, they discuss some of the language that has been important with the teacher. In other words, the language aspects are discussed after the task is complete. But ESP also aims at doing that. ESP directly aims at a communicate approach in the class, which would be student-centered, learning-centered, and also based on what is the need of the learner. In that sense, I think you would agree with me, TBL, also in a particular sense, I know it is different completely, but then it has a bearing on what an ESP is. Content and language integrated learning, CLIL, is an approach where students learn a subject and language at the same time. It was the case when ESP came at the beginning. Lure and Latour, they insisted on teaching English through the subjects which the students learn. For example, if there was a student of botany, and if subjects are taught in English, the botany textbooks themselves would be used for teaching English. So same could be applied for any other subject. A science course, for example, can be taught to students English. And they will not only learn about science, but they will also gain relevant vocabulary and language skills. If this is one of the aims of CLIL, this was also the aim of ESP in the past and even now. So the general effect of all this development is to exert pressure on the language teaching profession, not just in India, but all over the world, to deliver learner-centered and problem-specific language solutions. What does it mean for an English teacher in India? What does the learner need at the tertiary level? I, in fact, started talking about this. It might be slightly a repetition, but I'll skip wherever there is a repetition. Our learners pursue further study in India or abroad. They aspire for gainful placement in a multinational company. Some of them today, quite a lot of them today in good institutions, are interested in a startup. Each one of these objectives certainly necessitate proficiency in English language. For studying either in India or abroad, as it is all done in English medium, proficiency in English language plays a really very, very important role in how successful they are. Placement, all of you know that many jobs depend on one's communication skills. That's what I said. They try testing through GD, interview, and many other means. Now, some of you might have taught skills needed for facing an interview, or the skills needed for participating in a group discussion, or writing a CV, writing a statement of purpose when students particularly apply for placements in universities in the US, Australia, UK, and other places. And also for training in IELTS or other language proficiency tests which our students take. If we do it as an ESP course, then what can we do about training our students in facing an interview or participating in a GD, writing a CV, or writing an SOP, or training for IELTS? Because I'm sure there are teachers in this conference who have been handling courses for the Chennai University BTech students, and other universities also have. Most engineering institutions have in their syllabus, in their curriculum, facing an interview or participating in GD as a part of their course, as a part of their laboratory course. My concern here is to what extent our student has actually been facilitated to face an interview better. So how can be facilitated? What can some of the principles of ESP help in preparing a syllabus, in preparing the materials, in devising the classroom methodologies, and also devising tests where we can say at the end of my 6-hour or a 4-hour class with the students on facing an interview, the student's ability to face an interview has vastly developed. This would mean taking into account what exactly would be the needs of the learner from the point of view of the employer, one who conducts an interview. Is he conducting an interview just to get to know a few details? Most of the questions he asks, some of the answers are there in their CV. A few other answers are there as a kind of a social conversation. So what would be the expectation of the industry when they conduct an interview? When we talked to a few industry personnel, they said they're only primarily trying to understand from the way they talk whether a student was confident, had good interpersonal skills, had good social skills, can express himself to a desirable extent. A list of qualities which are more personality oriented than even grammar or vocabulary oriented. Same was the case even in participating in a GD. So what would be the expectation of the employer from a GD as different from participating in an interview? An interview is a one-to-one communication, but the demands on language are different. Whereas participating in a GD is a many-to-many communication where the demands on use of language are definitely different. The environment is also totally varied. The pressure on the student in a GD is much more. He's amidst 8 or 9 people. So, what? Not that we all do not know what I'm talking about, but what I am trying to talk about is: do we need a kind of a English for specific purpose course which would conduct a needs analysis, which would arrive at the right methodology, which would give us good testing procedures to tell ourselves that our students' performance in interview vastly improved after his ascents with me. Same can be the case with participating in a GD, writing a CV, writing an SOP. When I used to teach either in REC, NIT, Warangal, or in SSN, students will ask me to write a statement of purpose for them. At least one change I brought about there, I would never write an SOP for them, but I would definitely help them to write one and sort of be a editor for what they write. In a way, trying to teach them how to write an SOP. IELTS is something that everyone wants to, many students write, and their scores on this determines their admission in universities abroad or migration outside the states of Kerala, Punjab, in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh. They all give the maximum number of candidates to these exams. And there are lots of training institutions, face-to-face training institutions. There are apps and online solutions for cracking these exams available, which, as far as I know, are mostly done by not the English teachers, but lots of other kinds of people who have been in the industry. Some of them are engineers, some of them are doctors, some of them are retired army personnel. So, an English language testing system examination, the trainers are not necessarily English teachers. Anyone else is able to step into the shoes of teaching English or helping a student to face a test. Whereas an English teacher cannot do the contrary. We will not be able to get into the shoes of a doctor and say that we can also treat a patient, or get into the shoes of an engineer and say that I can also be technically as upright as you are. So these are certain points that I'm trying to put forth to raise the question: do we need to further and further look at preparing courses that would directly meet the needs of the learners, which would be termed as a course in ESP? Generally, what we find many places are they conduct a mock interview, they simulate interview condition. I'm not saying these are all wrong, these are all very good, provided they've been done keeping in mind the objectives of these courses, the needs of the learners, and also measuring the outcome of this training. Some of these methodologies have been very helpful. I found that students, when they watch the performance of facing an interview of their own peer group in the class, Their learning was much more quick and more effective than watching videos of interviews on YouTube because of several factors: cultural distancing. If we believe in ESP as a discipline, we can think of a vocabulary list which would really help the students to either face the interviews or participate in the GDs. What kind of words will reveal their leadership qualities? What kind of body gestures will do that? What are some of the words and body gestures and structures which they can perhaps shy away from to satisfy the demands of the test as perceived by the industry? There's a false notion in many people that when I was performing the GD, I made a couple of grammatical errors. Grammatical accuracy is definitely important. I'm not saying that it is not important. But what I'm trying to point out is GD as perceived by the students as a kind of a language test is wrong. They are testing a whole lot of other personality traits of the students, such as their group dynamism, interpersonal communication, ability to take turns. Some of them will never be able to take turn. The 10-minute GD, even after the 8th minute, some of them have not found an opportunity to make their appearance even once to talk. How do they take their turns? And how do they develop an idea? People are able to put forth an idea. What can you do to help them to develop an idea? One of the objectives of the GD is to lead the group towards a consensus, a kind of a group's agreement, and how each one of the participants has played a role in contributing to that to happen. We have seen quite a few of the participants, they'll be quite closely ended in their conversation. But the GD believes in open-endedness. You have to throw up possibilities for others to continue to talk. If we are being a closed-ended person, how can the course on GD help him to overcome this drawback? Sense of humor and being resourceful to talk about any topic under the sun. Team spirit. Again, some of the methodological issues. Can we organize practice GD with peer group? Can we watch the GD on a video? There are also lots of other training materials available online. And finally, some of the students go to the trainers available in the market outside. And what kind of a feedback can be productive and purposeful? Help the learners really acquire these skills. If it's a course on writing a CV, can we expose them to certain standard formats? Can we give them practice in writing? Provide appropriate feedback on what they've written? Can we look at writing as a collaborative activity? I had made my students at NIT and also SSN to write a group of 5 students would share what they write on a Google Doc, and they would be editing a particular CV. And we found that an extremely rewarding experience to get the views of the fellow students on how a CV could be improved. There's a lot of learning which couldn't have perhaps taken place even in a classroom. While teaching students how to write an SOP, applying the principles of ESP, one thing that was really necessary was many students did not know how to organize the content they had into a proper SOP. United States Education Foundation in India, attached to most consulates in the country, they have a particular section which helps the students with writing an SOP and also preparing for GRE. They place a lot of emphasis on the structure, the organizational structure. SOP should contain a bit of a personal background, financial background, academic details relevant to the course that you're applying for your post-graduation, your experience, other than what you have studied in the college, have been interning in some place or some other kind of a part-time work experience. And what are the immediate goals and long-term goals, and how does that tie up with the course that you're trying to do? Why you have chosen a particular university, and reasons for being interested in the chosen field. So SOPs of some students have all this content scattered around in different sections of the writing. They needed a skill to organize it. Well, there can be an argument that a general English program also can look at the organizational aspect of writing. But when we start looking at doing something which directly relates to the need of the learner, we would like to apply this term ESP. Other kinds of writing which might need an ESP approach to teaching them are writing a technical report, which is a part of the syllabus of most of the engineering courses, colleges, writing a lab report, writing an MTech or a PhD dissertation, writing an article. Now, this I thought I will see. When we have an ESP expertise, we have a lot of scope. Courses on English for air hostess, English for air traffic control officer. Every single air traffic control officer is tested twice in a year, both on his communication skills and his technical knowledge, in order to stay on the job. Otherwise, it could be detrimental to their career. So they do take a lot of training for facing these tests. English for hotel receptionists, for social upward mobility. The English in many countries has become also a language where it's associated with the elitist class and social upward mobility. English for a tourist guide, and English for a teacher. What kind of language is to be used in the class and what kind of language should not be used? How do you give feedback? How do you maintain discipline in class? So plenty of scope. It definitely helps one to climb the ladder of hierarchy in a job, English. So a course aimed at doing this will be very useful. Almost every single job. For example, I have an association with kind of English tests that the mariners have to take, people who are sailing. I was actually working with a company called Teledata, which was producing e-learning modules for the mariners, level 1 to level 8. And for every single sailor, whatever cadre he was working for, it was necessary for him to pass these tests to move up the levels in his job. The ESP course was extremely useful. It also saves time. One thing, learn a general English and be in a situation where you'll automatically acquire the English specific for that particular job or situation. That's what is happening most of the time, and it is very true. We all learn general English, and we are able to operate in most of the specific situations fairly comfortably. I'm definitely agree it will happen. But if we had a specific course on the kind of language necessary for different situations, then it might help us in better labels, in better structures. Overall, the use of language will be better in a particular context when it is consciously learned to suit the expectations of that particular domain. This is actually there on the advertisement. Just want to Cambridge English will teach English language skills to students in first and second semesters, and Microsoft will teach the best uses of its products like Microsoft Excel and Outlook in the third semester. Similarly, in the fourth semester, MathCAD, computer software used for verification, validation, documentation of mathematical calculations, and engineering will be taught. On the fifth semester, engineering stream-specific industry experts will train students for upskilling. For example, L&T EduTech, a leading construction company that has also ventured into education sector, will take classes for civil engineering students and help them bridge the gap between industry and academia. See, this is taken from a document. What I'm trying to say by showing you that slide is, whatever had been the prerogative or stayed in the domain of a teacher is now gradually moving away from that of a teacher to the industry and other companies which have language training modules on mobile phones and all kinds of online devices. Therefore, I feel that a conscious attempt at improving ourselves as an ESP specialist